We are in the middle of a war, one that's been going on forever, to protect a secret so powerful.
So dark, the con of man.
Essentially, it's a Grail quest. It's the kind of journey that offers the heroes, the protagonists, a sense of discovery, enlightenment. They're tested in ways that they never would have been tested otherwise as they pursue this goal of understanding, and if possible, controlling the Holy Grail.
I didn't want to sell the film rights. I knew that I was writing a trilogy, that there would be 3 Langdon books, and I said, you know what, I want to wait till they're all done and then just sell the rights. Or maybe not. I was in the fortunate position that I didn't need a movie deal to pay my rent, and I've always had this thing about movies that once you see the character on the screen, the reading experience is different. That the beauty of books is that everyone in the world pictures Robert Langdon differently, pictures the perfect Silas, the perfect Langdon for their experience.
And action!
The second you make a movie, suddenly everybody's picturing Tom Hanks, which is wonderful, but I'm saying it changes the reading experience. So I was interested in letting all the books sort of get out there and do their thing, and then coming with movies later. When there was initially talk of dealing with people of the caliber of John Calley and certainly Ron Howard, that started to shift a little bit in my mind.
And I got a call from Howard Stringer, who was chairman of Sony, and he and I read incessantly and talk incessantly about the things we've read, and he said he was early in a book that was so thrilling that he wanted me to know right away so that we could read it simultaneously. So I went out to the bookstore and I read it and decided to buy it immediately. I was fascinated by it.
It's one of those things where I was hearing the title floating around, and Brian Grazer mentioned it. I didn't really know much about it. He just was curious if I knew anything. Sony controlled the rights to it through John Calley, and they were curious to know whether I was interested in directing. And I asked Brian, was this the project you were talking about? And he said, yeah, I was trying to get the rights to it. I couldn't, Sony got it, but I'm really interested in this. You know, what do you think? Roughly the same moment, my wife Cheryl's book group was reading Da Vinci Code. So I actually got their reviews of it, which were glowing, just about the time I was reading it myself to see whether I thought it would be a movie. And so I think I kind of discovered Da Vinci Code more or less the way the whole world has, mostly through amazing word of mouth. In choosing to take it to the screen, you also have to ask yourself a lot of the questions that the book asks anyone who reads it. How do you feel about some of the premises and the ideas put forth? You know, what do you think? What do you feel about these issues yourself? What does the academic community think? What's been substantiated? What's kind of ancient conspiracy theory stuff that Dan has borrowed and cleverly weaved into the story? I won't go into any detail because I don't really want to project my feelings about these issues or questions onto the viewer. It stimulates interpretation and discussion. I've never really had a film like this that not only generates feeling and emotion and hopefully entertains, I always am aiming for that, but really does stimulate great conversation.
The only thing that matters is what you believe.
By the time we'd all decided to kind of make the leap, the book had gone from being a big hit to being this historic success story in terms of, just how many books it sold. And to date, I have no idea. It's gazillions of, bazillions of books. But it's a record. And it was promising to be a record about the time that we were agreeing to tackle the first draft screenplay. Very loosely, I say that, and it's easy because Brian Grazer and I didn't have to write a word of it. That task fell to Akiva Goldsman.
Brian Grazer called and said, Ron Howard is going to direct this, and we'd like to offer it to you to write. And Ron and I have worked together a bunch, and we have a really good working relationship. So I thought, great, fantastic, let me read it. And I read it, and I was tremendously impressed and thought I had absolutely no idea how to adapt.
He did this himself in his own blood?
Is it possible?
It's a very complex and very labyrinthian and very intricate piece of fiction. I shied away from it. And I actually sat down with Ron, and he had such a clear idea of what he wanted to do with it, and that gave me the confidence to do it.
Anytime you adapt a novel, you're talking about taking 500 pages of text and exposition and compressing it down into 2.5 hours of entertainment. Something's got to give. And everybody was really on the same team, which was exciting. It seemed that there was no ego involved. How do we serve the story was really always the question. Does this serve the story? Who cares who wrote it? That was a pretty magical process to be able to go to Akiva and say, you know what, how about if we did this? And sometimes he'd say, yeah, great idea, let's do it. And sometimes he'd say, no, let me tell you why you can't do that in a movie. And I'd say, oh, I guess you're right. It was a real learning experience for me.
I think it is a thriller for people who like thrillers and a thriller for people who don't, because I think what it does is, first, it has a kind of familiar thriller grammar. The book itself has kind of very short chapters. It is episodic. At the same time, it does something very clever. It uses our cultural backstory as its backstory, uses our history as a springboard. In a science fiction novel, for example, first you would have to explain what everybody thought, and then explain how those thoughts were being subverted and rewritten by the narrative of the story. Here, you don't have to explain what everybody thinks. You simply say, Jesus Christ, and people have a fully resonant understanding of who they believe he was. And then the story can take the time to explore that understanding without having to explain it first.
Mary Magdalene was Jesus' wife. This is the secret the Priory of Sion has defended for over 20 centuries. They are the guardians of the royal bloodline.
I think the movie has a slightly different tack than the book does. This is one of the few places where we sort of vary substantively from the book. And what we've done is we have paid more attention to the Priory of Sion, which is an either real or unreal, depending on who you ask, group of men who have protected the secret of the Holy Grail through the centuries.
The Priory are here to protect you now, as they have always protected our family.
Dan Brown knew we were going to have to make some changes in terms of creating an adaptation.
It was far more important to capture the themes and the feel than it was to capture every single piece of dialogue and every single little bit of action. An example of something that had to be cut just for time, there's a scene in the novel where Langdon and Sophie go to a university library and they run this Boolean search for Alexander Pope. Well, that's a whole scene.
Where are you going?
Getting you a library card.
And instead of doing that, they meet somebody on a bus who happens to have a little BlackBerry or something. And they're able to do the search sort of while they're going somewhere, and it saves enormous amount of time. You get the fact that they did the search and it was a computer and you get all the same information, it just happens in a slightly more efficient way. And it doesn't really change anything about the structure of the book. But if you're an absolute purist, you'll say, hey, they missed that. But they really did. It was just handled slightly differently.
He read all the drafts of the script and we talked, argued, debated, laughed. He's a really smart, wonderful fellow who is the mother and father of all these characters. And I'm like the stepmother and stepfather. So, it's this fascinating process of, passing your children off from person to person. It's been fun. It's been a really wonderful collaboration.
That was a great line too, Dan.
I thought I could come up with one fast enough.
He was a great resource and also offered up a lot of interesting facts. A number of things found their way into the screenplay, that he's discovered since the novel had been published. So it's kind of, our movie in some ways is kind of the updated, annotated version of the Da Vinci Code. But we did our own research also. We hired a couple of researchers to dig into some of the controversial issues. It wasn't hard to find. There's a cottage industry, which is sort of all about discussing and analyzing the novel. I did a lot of that reading myself, and it was somewhat informative, but again and again, we kept coming back to the novel. It is a novel. Dan's the first to say, sure, there's arguments here which have been made for a long time and can be defended, but that's really not first and foremost what it's about. It's an entertainment designed to stimulate thought and discussion.
Maybe there is something about this Priory of Sion.
So it's not really putting forth a theory. Dan's the first to say that. It's kind of weaving together this what-if scenario. that turns out to be mysterious, intriguing, entertaining, and thought-provoking, and those are all good things for fiction.
Imagine then, Robert, that Christ's throne might live on in a female child. Witness the greatest cover-up in human history.
Thank God there is this alliance between Ron and Brian and Akiva Goldsman, who is an extraordinary writer. And when we got his draft, we were all thrilled. And Dan in particular was astonished at the job of compression that he did, that when you see the film, it felt to me as though this was the Da Vinci Code, that it is essentially a very good reflection of the book and its intentions.
She rests at last beneath starry skies.